The push to clean up the Tijuana River Valley has support from both sides of the aisle, and the cross-border call to protect health and economy along the waterway.
When the police dog shows up, boost! Sticker, 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 sticker. Good boy. People tend to give up. There's something visceral, dinosaur brain inside us that even though we may wish to have our lives ended, nobody wants to get eaten.
Trained to protect and serve, the debate over using police dogs in potentially dangerous situations.
It affects everyone. I would say my own wife has suffered post-traumatic stress just in her relationship with me and the war that I fought in.
A new Ken Burns documentary brings stark memories for veterans. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. A San Diego lawyer has joined the legal fight to block the repeal of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The lawsuit filed today says President Trump's move violated the constitutional rights of immigrants who lack legal status. Immigration attorney Dulce Garcia is one of 6 plaintiffs in the suit. Her parents brought her to the U.S. when she was 4, and she grew up in San Diego. Several other lawsuits challenging the end of DACA have been filed, including by the state of California and University of California system. Several dozen young immigrants shouted at House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi today in San Francisco. Today's protests may have been aimed at her talks with the president about the future of DACA. San Diego's International Rescue Committee is looking for new leadership. The change at the local resettlement agency comes after its national office found problems with how it secured homes for refugees. KPBS City Heights reporter Taryn Minto has details.
The IRC's headquarters in New York confirmed its executive director is no longer with the San Diego agency. A posting for the job appeared online last week. The national office said earlier this month the San Diego affiliate had engaged in housing placement practices that were inconsistent with its policies. The agency's statement followed a KPBS investigation that found 7 families living with more people in their apartment than on their lease, which is a potential contract violation. Some refugees said they were told by IRC San Diego staff to sign incorrect rental documents because larger, affordable apartments were difficult to find. Others said they were unaware the papers were inaccurate when they signed them. IRC San Diego's then executive director initially said staffers told him they did not ask refugees to conceal the size of their families. He has not responded to requests for comment since the national office's findings. The resettlement agency uses federal dollars to cover refugees' needs, including housing. They're expected to follow occupancy guidelines that generally suggest up to 5 or 6 people in a 2-bedroom. Families interviewed by KPBS had 7 or 8 in a home that size, with names omitted from their lease. San Francisco-based attorney Nils Rosenquist previously told KPBS occupancy limits are often set by landlords because there is no universal rule.
It's up to the landlord to choose, subject to certain local limitations, but the landlord can choose anything that's reasonable, provided it's non-discriminatory.
The California Department of Fair Employment and Housing investigates discrimination cases. In a past interview, Department Director Kevin Kish said a complaint must be filed in order for his office to launch an inquiry, but familial status may be considered during the review.
The age of the children also plays into the analysis of how reasonable the restriction is.
The IRC's national office said it is working to support the affected families, but did not give details. 5 of the 7 families interviewed by KPBS say they're still living in apartments that are too small. One says it plans to move to Michigan. Taryn Minto, KPBS News.
Plans for a Christian-themed resort in Mission Valley stalled today. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says the project failed to win a majority at the San Diego City Council.
The man behind the project is San Diego-based televangelist Morris Cerullo. He wants to build a luxury hotel, theater, spa, and missionary training center on an 18-acre property on Hotel Circle South. City staffers said there would be no unmitigated traffic impacts, but Councilman Chris Ward was not convinced the traffic analysis was realistic.
So it's, I think a well-intentioned project, but it's just, might be not the right location. I know you examined some other alternative sites, and I think without a whole lot of analysis or comment, kind of ruled those inferior to your preferred site.
The project failed 5-4 with the council's 5 Democrats voting no. Councilman Scott Sherman, whose district includes Mission Valley, says he's disagreed with developers before.
But if they follow the rules, and they follow the law, and they're following the code, and they do everything by the rules that the city sets forward, we can't, nor should we, find against them if they've done everything they're supposed to.
Council members agreed to rehear the item next month, although it's not clear how or whether the project will be any different. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
2 San Diego congressmen are calling on federal lawmakers to approve their proposal to protect and clean up the Tijuana River Valley. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson has more.
Democrat Juan Vargas and Republican Darrell Issa gathered reporters near the border to discuss the future of the Tijuana River Valley. The area endured months of raw sewage flows this past winter, in addition to ongoing struggles with trash and sediment. Now, the lawmakers are offering legislation that calls for local, state, and federal officials to work on solutions with their Mexican counterparts. A statement from Juan Vargas called the bill a way to rehabilitate the valley and prevent future spills. ISA's statement said the ongoing sewage spills not only threaten the region's economy, but also people's health. He said solving the problem will require cross-border cooperation. Now, the legislation calls for the Army Corps of Engineers to come up with solutions, and it clears the way for the U.S. to grant funds for the project on both sides of the border. Now, the measure also creates a trans-boundary alert system that's aimed at warning U.S. citizens if health risks are present. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Today, San Diego released numbers on the use of police canines from 2013 to July of this year. Southeastern San Diego saw the most canine bites last year at 32, while Central San Diego had 14. Police dogs are commonly used to defuse potentially violent situations, but some say there are other ways. KPBS investigative reporter Amita Sharma has the story, which contains graphic content that may be disturbing to some of our viewers.
Video of a shirtless African-American man named Caron Cheatham lying face down on the ground, handcuffed, as a police dog bit his arm went viral in July. The image of this scene prompted Trunell Price of the newly resurrected San Diego Black Panther Party to speak out.
What happened to Mr. Cheatham was an inhumane act. They had no compassion for the fact that they had this suspect on the ground in handcuffs and allowed the canine to continue to chew on him.
Officers and the dog were responding to calls that Cheatham was darting through traffic, leaping onto cars, and picking fights with bystanders. According to reports, Cheatham also threatened officers when the dog was released and bit him.
Our dogs bite. They bite and hold. It is a trained behavior.
Stick it. Get it. Oh, there you go, pal. Good boy.
So we're looking to apprehend or stop a behavior, and the bite and hold allows us to gain control of the individual, minimizes the amount of damage done, because by and large, this bite is a couple of punctures and pressure.
San Diego Public Information Officer Larry Adair wouldn't speak about the Cheatham case because it's under investigation, but he did talk about how officers remove a canine off a suspect. It's not by verbal command.
We remove the dog physically through the mechanical application of pressure on the dog's correction collar to forcibly remove them from the bite when it's safe to do so.
Adair has been a canine handler for the department for 15 years.
Ari! How's my boy? Heel! Heel! Sit! Plutz! This is my partner, Ari. It's a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois, Plotz.
San Diego police have a total of 33 canine teams. The dogs are a cross-section of breeds: Belgian Malinois, German Shepherds, Dutch Shepherds. Adair says the department imports sports dogs from Europe.
What we buy are the AA ball players who ain't making the pros.
Once the dogs arrive in San Diego, Adair says police training includes bonding with their handler, a 10-week academy, further training, and then actual deployment depending on their aptitude. Like many departments across the country, San Diego police deploy a canine when suspects are viewed as armed, dangerous, and are resisting officers' orders. Adair says since January, there were 10,000 police calls for canine units.
When the police dog shows up, poost! Sticker, 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 sticker. Good boy. People tend to give up. There's something visceral, dinosaur brain inside us that even though we may wish to have our lives ended, nobody wants to get eaten.
Adair adds, since January of this year, police avoided using force at least 145 times because of a canine team's presence. He says the de-escalation that comes with using canines is vital.
I've been shot at 9 times. In my career, 6 officers have been murdered.
Adair says the dogs keep officers safe.
My partner Jake was stabbed 15 times, saving my life in 2008. I'm alive because that dog was there.
The dogs, Adair says, also keep the public safe. But San Diego lawyer Nathan Shaman isn't so sure.
I personally don't believe that it is appropriate to use police canines for force at all.
His client, Sarah Lowry, was bitten by a San Diego police canine in 2010 after she tripped a silent burglar alarm at her workplace. She sued, but a federal appeals court ruled in June that the officers used reasonable force. Since 2013, there were 223 dog bites reported by San Diego police. Since 2014, there have been 5 claims filed against San Diego over canine bites. 2 of those cases were settled, one for $1,000, another for $385,000.
They are too unpredictable in their behavior.
Shaman says there is another way. Like the city of Los Angeles, he wants to see San Diego police train their dogs to find and bark, not bite and hold.
Plots!
Amita Sharma, KPBS News.
The U.S. Navy has fired 2 senior commanders nearly 1 month after one of their vessels crashed into a ship near Japan. The collision killed 10 soldiers and wounded many. The firing comes a day before top Navy officials testified to Congress. A few months ago, 7 soldiers died from another ship collision near Japan. So far, 6 senior Navy leaders have been fired. PBS stations are airing a 10-part series on the Vietnam War. Some veterans are expected to avoid the documentary, fearing the traumatic memories that could be triggered. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh has the story.
The documentary The Vietnam War is being billed as a rare cultural milestone, at least for veterans of the war.
In any kind of historical presentation, you've got to have 25 or 30 years perspective.
Filmmakers Ken Burns and Lynn Novick have been planning the series since 2006, meaning their production process for the series is about as long as the declared conflict.
It was obvious that they could pick us up on their radar. I remember my knees shaking, and I was saying, holy smokes, I'm going into war.
It's designed to be intense.
And I was just performing what I was doing. And then I got hit.
Maybe too intense for some Vietnam vets. Henry Peterson is a chaplain at the VA in San Diego. He counsels people with PTSD. He surveyed them to find out who will be watching.
Some are going to watch it, few will. It could bring back some memories that they don't want to deal with. And again, it may surface some things that they may need to deal with.
It's the geropsychiatric department.
Tina Mays, a staff psychologist at the VA in San Diego, says almost anything can trigger the vivid, aggressive thoughts associated with PTSD. A door slam, the smell of diesel.
It can literally be anything that somebody says, the way they say it.
News, films, and documentaries are among the most common triggers.
I would say that majority of the veterans I work with, they try, when their symptoms are high, they're actively avoiding any media.
Vietnam vets are particularly vulnerable. Most were not treated early. PTSD treatment evolved after this group of vets were home from the war. In the 1970s, the VA was often unwelcoming. Society in general appeared at best uninterested in the plight of returning vets. Older Vietnam vets in particular have among the highest rates of suicide.
Honestly, we don't know exactly why, but there is some research that suggests that one of the reasons is because of the way that they were received when they came back.
This group of vets can live for decades with the symptoms of untreated PTSD, like the aggression that feels like it comes out of nowhere.
I moved down here in 2010.
Larry Taylor is a combat veteran of Vietnam.
It affects everyone. I would say my own wife has suffered post-traumatic stress just in her relationship with me and the war that I fought in.
Before he was treated, he coped by avoiding his triggers. He didn't see Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, then the original Gulf War blanketed TV.
4, 3, 2, 1, impact. Boom! There's a hit. There's a shack. And oh yeah.
As the war raged, so did Taylor's symptoms.
Basically, after the Gulf War initiated, my PTSD kicked in. I would wake up screaming. My wife was wondering what's going on. I was having nightmares all the time during the daytime.
Still, Taylor wouldn't seek treatment for another decade. Now he's the chief of chaplain services at the VA in San Diego. He plans to watch the 18-hour-long documentary.
I think today I know the difference between a bad memory and reliving a situation. And I'm fortunately not reliving things the way I once did.
His guidance for vets is don't feel obligated to watch. If you do, find a loved one to watch it with you. Taylor is enlisting his wife of 46 years. In the past, the VA has provided outreach around movies like Saving Private Ryan for vets who may feel triggered by what they're seeing. This time, the VA is partnering with PBS to prepare to provide counseling for any vet who feels it's time to start working through their own experience with the war. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
The Vietnam War series continues tonight, showing President Kennedy and his advisors discuss how much involvement is needed for South Vietnam. That starts at 8 right here on KPBS.
I'm Hari Srinivasan on the next News Hour. A rarely heard voice at the center of the immigration debate, a sitting federal judge on the backlogs in the court. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
Cloudy weather and temperatures in the 70s for San Diego this week. Geoff Cornish has more in tonight's forecast.
Sometimes we have to talk about some fairly negative things in the world of weather, whether it be hurricanes, devastating situation in the Caribbean this evening, and extreme heat in the west. But we have some good news for you in Southern California today. There are 2 cold fronts this week, and we can put a fork in summer. Summer weather is ending. We have a cold front pushing through the west coast essentially now. It'll eventually push a little farther south into the day tomorrow. And then there's another one at the end of the work week. We're going to find ourselves with a situation with temperatures about 5 to 10 degrees below average. We do have some stubborn clouds near the coast, and that's no surprise. Satellite radar pretty innocuous on a local scale. We pull it out, though, and you can see, if you kind of notice this band of clouds, here it is, and it sort of fades. The tail of this does weaken as it approaches Central California. That's the first front of the week, and it's a nice thing for us. 66 degrees for your overnight low tonight, becoming cloudier. That little daily tide of low clouds will march in later on tonight. And we'll be around 66 in San Diego, but look at the areas that often deal with the big-time heat. We are able to cool down to 65 at Borrego Springs. We'll take that in stride. It will be a breezy time through Tuesday, but this is a wind of change, and I think it's a popular one. So we don't have much in the way of rainfall in our forecast at this latitude. Most of the moisture tied to these fronts is generally up in the northwestern U.S., not the southwest. But we look great tomorrow. Look at this. Borrego Springs, 95. We'll celebrate that we're out of the triple digits there. Into Ramona, 80 degrees. Oceanside, a beautiful 75, 74 into San Diego. Our only issue will be those low clouds in the morning with a slow erosion of them through the afternoon. And it'll be kind of a slow process, but we'll get there, and there's hope for some sunshine, especially for those of you east of the coastline. Late this week, we stay cool. The big dip in the jet stream only becomes more pronounced, and that's a popular thing. So here we go into forecast mode, 5-day forecast for the coast. Low to mid 70s. Could be a brief shower or two Thursday. It won't be long lasting, though. Low clouds giving way to sunshine for the inland areas. Very nice down into the mid 70s Thursday, 74 degrees. The mountains, look at that. A couple of showers Thursday and a high of 57 on Friday. And a quick look at the desert forecast. Down to 84 Friday. That's a win. I'm Geoff Cornish for KPBS News.
San Diego's fire chief delivers an alarming report. Today, Chief Brian Fennessy told a city council committee in his 40 years of fighting fires, he has not seen wildfire conditions so ripe. CAL FIRE has responded to more than 5,000 fires statewide so far this year. These fires have scorched more than 200,000 acres. This winter's rain led to a greening period, but this new growth has since died. Fennessy says this dead grass can carry fire to heavier, drought-stricken vegetation, and that, combined with little to no rain in the forecast, has created dire conditions. The nation's solar market continues growing, but there are concerns that decades of expansion could come to a halt. The Solar Energy Industries Association says the nation added more solar energy capacity in the second quarter of this year than any other second quarter. The association's Sean Gallagher says that the large utility scale projects drove much of the growth, but residential solar has also expanded. He says, however, an international trade case could lead to steep tariffs on imported solar panels.
If the tariffs were adopted the way they've been proposed, it would double the cost of solar, and we expect it to cut the size of the market in half over the next few years and eliminate as many as 16,000 jobs in California next year alone.
California currently has more than 2,600 companies that rely on a vibrant solar energy for their livelihood. A discussion on the tariff case could come from the International Trade Commission by Friday. A large chunk of the federal funding community health clinics rely on will run out at the end of the month. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg says clinic officials are urging Congress to help them avoid falling off a financial cliff.
$3.6 billion in federal money is at stake. Thousands of community clinics nationwide might have to close if Congress doesn't renew that funding by September 30th. Vernita Todd is Senior Vice President of Health Center Partners of Southern California. That's a network of 17 community clinics in San Diego, Riverside, and Imperial counties. Todd says community clinics have faced financial deadlines before.
But we have never gotten to the point that we're 15 days away from the end of the year without knowing about our funding for the next year. This is a first.
There's bipartisan support for community clinics in Congress. Even so, Todd says it's unclear whether Congress will take action before the deadline. Kenny Goldberg, KPBS News.
Next Wednesday marks 1 year since Alfred Alongo was shot and killed by a police officer in El Cajon. His death sparked protest and raised many questions about race and policing. But have any of those questions been answered? We want to hear from you at our KPBS Listening Post. It's this Friday from noon to 3 at the corner of Main Street in Magnolia in downtown El Cajon. Again, this is our KPBS Listening Post where you tell us your story. Cuyamaca College saw a 7-fold increase in the number of students passing college math last year. Instead of requiring underprepared students to catch up on high school math first, it put them in college math with extra help. KPBS education reporter Megan Burke says the state lawmakers want every community college to make that change.
Assembly Bill 705 would do away with the placement tests community colleges give to incoming students. Instead, they'd use high school grades, which are more reliable indicators of whether a student needs remediation. It would also prohibit remedial courses for all but those who are extremely underprepared. Katie Hearn is director of the California Acceleration Project. The faculty group supports the bill.
Research behind these changes is so clear that it's sort of hard to argue at this point.
Now, opponents of the measure say it proposes big changes without defining which students should be considered underprepared. The governor has until the end of the month to sign the bill. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
6 researchers emerged Sunday from isolation. They've been living in a simulation of life on Mars. They devoured fruit and eggs after surviving on mostly freeze-dried food since January when the project started. The crew of 4 men and 2 women have been quarantined for 8 months near a volcano in Hawaii. They wore spacesuits and traveled in teams whenever they left their small dome living structure. The NASA-backed study will look at the psychological impacts of long-term space missions on astronauts.
We need to send humans out because it's important for the future of the species. I think it's actually really important to get off Earth. If you look back at the geological record, it is just full of mass extinctions.
NASA says they hope to send humans to Mars by 2030. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Morning Edition, renovating rides and revamping of the Balboa Park Carousel. And on Midday Edition, from scraps to snacks, the push to compost more waste and to build a new food rescue in San Diego. That's tomorrow at noon on KPBS Radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.